Now, my great pleasure to introduce Professor Rob Verchick, one of the nation's leading scholars in disaster and climate change law. He holds the Gauthier-St. Eminent Scholar Chair in Environmental Law at Loyola University, where he also directs the Center on Environment, Land, and the Law. Professor Verchick is the author of more than 60 articles and 4 books, including his recent bestseller, The Octopus in the Parking Garage, A Call for Climate Resilience. His expertise extends beyond the academy. He served in the Obama administration as a senior official at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, helping shape national climate adaptation policy. Having grown up in the deserts of Las Vegas and later experiencing Hurricane Katrina as a resident of New Orleans, Professor Verchick brings both personal experience and deep scholarly insight to the question of how communities can build resilience in the face of climate change. We're fortunate to welcome him tonight to share his insights on issues involving our oceans. The title of his lecture, another good title, is The Whale That Danced the Ocean, that Danced the Blues, Our Battle to Save the Ocean. Please join me in welcoming Professor.
What an event. I mean, thank you so much for having me. And the talent in this room is just extraordinary. I don't want it to ring, but the amount of talent and commitment in this room asks. So I'm going to ask you to just indulge for a minute, and I want you to take deep breath in your next breath. Okay. One of those breaths came from what you think. I might, you said some lovely things. I'm so proud and happy to be here. But I would be the first one to tell you that I'm not necessarily the person who knows about the ocean because I'm from Las Vegas and because I'm a lawyer. But in my defense, I have spent the last 30 years living in the summertime in a small cabin on Long Island, which is in the Salem Sea. And for many, many years, while I've been doing other things, I've been captivated by this one individual. Her name is Tahlequah. And Tahlequah is an orca whale. And she's a member of a community of orca whales called the Southern Residents, which meets its own definition, or our own definition, subspecies. So the Southern Resident orcas in the Salem Sea are on the endangered species list around 2005, something like that. There are only 73 of her kind in the world. Now, Tahlequah is about 27 years old and still very healthy, very smart, and resourceful. You might have known or learned or heard something about Tahlequah in the past, and you might not know it. The reason is that in 2018, she lost a calf during childbirth. And in a type of mourning that sometimes whales do, what was described actually as a dance of grief, Tahlequah moved the calf with her, they call it a rostrum, on her nose, for over 1,000 miles for 17 days. And Tahlequah, with her small calf, who weighed something like 400 pounds, took enormous power to move that way. In fact, she took many deep breaths, probably 7 or 8 breaths, just to submerge when the calf's body would fall down to the surface. And then she would pull it back up and keep pushing. And when she ran out of steam and it's too hard to do, other members of her pod, her mother, sisters, cousins, would come and help move the calf with her. This captivated people all over. And there were reporters from all over the world watching Tahlequah's dance of grief through this. And I was captivated by this story. And I read tons about people were writing poetry about it. Children were writing songs about Tahlequah. One word that came out over and over and over again was heartbreak. And it was heartbreaking to see something like this. It's heartbreaking too because our ocean, it's just one, our ocean, like Tahlequah's family, is in deep trouble. And one of the ways, imagine how we can figure this out, is by looking at a story like this and then taking a larger view of things. Now, I have been thinking about Tahlequah since 2018. While I've been writing other books, while I've been teaching other classes, while I've been doing other things, I've always thought about this. And it struck me, even though my area in the beginning was not ocean law, and certainly my defense, Las Vegas was at the sea bottom 100 million years ago or so. And I know because I used to collect fossils and trilobites. But aside from that, right, it took a long time to kind of figure out what's going on with the ocean and why I need to care about it. And what would it be to reimagine the way that we think about our planet and the ocean and the law that governs it? You might have seen this picture, all right? This is called the blue marble picture. It came from Apollo 17. I remember seeing the picture when it first came out. It was a Life magazine when I was a kid in Las Vegas. And the only thing that I saw was that there were 2 really big deserts there, which goes to show you that you see what you expect to see, right? Now, this picture, there's been a lot written about it, and it shaped the way maybe a lot of people have actually seen their world since then. But I want to show you a different picture that I bet haven't seen. It's actually an image made by computer satellites. And the reason is Apollo 17 was the last time we were ever far enough away to get the entire globe in a single snapshot. All right. But I want you to look at this next one. This is called the water planet image. And the one thing I love about this is you can look and look and look, and you have to see water, because that's almost all there is. All right. That is 330 million cubic miles of water. We are the water planet, right? And we are incredibly lucky to be living on a water planet. Because as far as we know, we haven't seen any others, right? And what I want to do today is show you or explain why this water is so important, why it is so critical, and what we might be able to do in terms of rethinking our structures of governance and law, do something about it, right? Something that any of you here could imagine doing something that could affect this problem that we have. And I'm actually going to show you from a few places on this picture too, just to sort of illustrate some of these things. You know that over 70% of our planet is covered with water. We learned that one a lot, all right? And that is incredibly important, even though there are lots of people who've never been to the ocean, right? And I know it's hard to believe if you're living here, but I want you to believe that. I want you to know that, right? There are people today who are like, why do I care about the ocean at all? I've never seen it, all right? 50% of your oxygen comes from the ocean, probably 70 or 80. They still debate that. One thing I want you to know is most of the oxygen comes from plant life in the ocean. It can't even see what's small. All right. That's the air you breathe here. It's the air I breathe in Portland. It's the air that I breathe in Kansas City when I used to teach in Kansas City. All right. That's one reason it's important to have an ocean. The other is that it feeds an incredible number of in fact, most of us, whether we know it or not, are dependent on sea life for eating, and probably your dogs and cats are too, right? The gerbils. So that we know is important. It also, this ocean governs all of the navigation we take. That's the currents, and if you can make some connections to winds as well. All right. And it holds 90% of the heat that comes into the atmosphere. If we didn't have an ocean to hold that heat, climate change would have cooked us already. We could not be alive. And actually, that's an interesting story too, because I write about climate adaptation and resilience a lot. A lot of times we're like, well, should we be clamping down on climate change and carbon? And the answer is yes. But the other answer is, even if you turned out all the lights and never burned another splint of carbon again, it would be another 100 years before the climate would start getting. And the reason is because we're a giant hot water bomb, right? Because all that thermal energy is stored in the ocean. So it is not an exaggeration, right, to say no blue, no green. Now, I didn't make that up. That is a phrase that comes from Sylvia Earle, some of you may know, the brilliant, probably most well-known living marine scientist. This woman has walked on the seafloor 1,000 feet below water, all right, in the specials. Okay, she's done everything. I've had the chance to meet her twice now. And one time, I'll tell you a couple of things that I had forgotten to say. Part of this is I'm writing a book called The Whale Who Danced. Okay, and you may know that. It started as a project a couple of years ago at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. I had a fellowship there. And that's when I had a team in helping me work out many of these ideas. I mentioned that because in 1969, Sylvia Earle, the same type of fellowship at Radcliffe. And so we talked about oceans and work, and we talked about saving the ocean. And she's taught me two things. One thing she wanted to make sure I knew, which is science is not going to solve this problem. Collective action and governance is going to solve this problem. I thought, great, okay, I have a degree, at least law. That's worth something in this field, right? The second thing she said was never, ever give up. And that's essentially what this whole talk is about. There she is in French Polynesia, where I first met her, being honored by the Wayfinders, a group of navigators, navigating. When Sylvia Earle is out talking, you can see her on YouTube all the time. She'll tell you that climate change is doing a number of things. All right. One is it's making it much, much hotter. We're having marine heat waves all over the ocean. in the Gulf Coast of Florida, every summer, it's the temperature that changes. Not kidding, right? The other thing that it's doing is it's making the ocean more acidic, right? There's a chemical process that's happening, but essentially what's happening is it's not just the heat that's being absorbed by the ocean, it's the carbon molecules that are being absorbed by the ocean. And that creates a chemical reaction in which the pH balance of the ocean changes, right? And if you want to know what a change in pH balance can do to shells like this or to coral, what you could do is take any little seashell that you don't care much about and leave it overnight in a glass of vinegar. All right. That's what vinegar is a type of an acid, right? And so that's one of the things that's happening here. And sea level rise is changing not just our lives on the coast, which is important, but it's also changing the life of the ocean because plants and animals like coral that live under the ocean close to sunlight are farther away from sunlight as the sea rises. So all of these things become bigger, right? So we have problems with heat, acidification, sea level rise. Now we also have other harms that are happening as well. And this is the idea that I have about climate adaptation. You can't change what the climate is doing to the ocean. What you might be able to change are the other stressors that are making it so much harder for the ocean to bound. Right? We've got too much pollution, we've got too much overfishing, and we've got too many shenanigans going on, right? Just too much ransacking the ocean to allow that to happen. Okay, so that's the science, okay? What do we know about governance? All right, and I love it. When I was at Great Polynesia, on ocean governance, one of the wayfinders I was talking about, kind of snickered and said, nobody governs the ocean, right? Which is true, right? We govern ourselves on the ocean, and we can blame or credit Hugo Grotius for this. Some of you may know the name, some of you may have studied. He was a philosopher, a brilliant legal mind from the 1600s. And he basically called the father of international law, and he came up with a lot of ideas that you know. What you might not know is that he was a hired gun. He was hired essentially by the Dutch to make a legal argument, a legal and a philosophical argument, so that the Dutch could justify using the seas in traffic so that they could colonize. Because at the time, Spain and Portugal claimed that they owned all the ocean. All right. And so he wrote a very, very persuasive piece saying, no, in fact, the ocean is free to all. You can take what you want. All right. And that stuck with us for a very long time. Now, I have to say that he was flexible in his thinking because later on, Grotius left the Dutch and he went to Sweden, and it was employed by the government of Sweden. And he wrote another paper that we don't talk nearly as much about. But what he said basically is Sweden owns the Baltic Sea. Okay, and he said, well, because that's smaller, so you can own that. All right. Now, it's turned out that we've used both these ideas, but not necessarily in the best way. There are problems, and when I was trying to reimagine ocean governance, I can still call it that, some of the problems, and you just know this from talking to people, is that we're estranged from the ocean. We don't feel like we belong. We've got a whole set of Western culture, and I'll have to say lots of cultures, right, that alienated the ocean. It's a place of danger, a place that's lawless, a place that only bizarre things happen in. It's foreign, so it must be run by different rules, or we can't care about it. The other problem is that we have a very shallow and fragmented way of thinking about it. There are so many treaties about the ocean. There are more than 12 or 13 federal agencies in the United States that have something to say about ocean governance one way or another. We've got treaties on whales and treaties on seals and treaties on pollock and treaties on migratory birds and migratory fish, but we don't put all of those things together. And the trouble is that if we try to govern things separate like this, we can't put the whole thing together as a functioning system. The last part of this is our ideas are very fixed. And all of law is fixed. It's supposed to be, because law is supposed to provide stability and predictability and make people feel safe, right? But sometimes it gets frozen. And here's an idea that when one of the things I was doing when I was at Harvard Radcliffe was I was doing a lot of whale watching. And you could go to this beautiful, oh, you should go, it's Stellwagen Bay National Marine Sanctuary, one of the first marine sanctuaries in the United States, made by Congress. It's a feeding ground for humpback whales, one of the best places to see humpback whales in the entire world. And because it's this protected sanctuary, the ships are limited in terms of how many can go and how fast they can go and all of these things. And it's brilliant for the whales, all right? Because the ocean is heating. Some scientists think within 25 to 50 years, the whales won't be here. They're going to be, up in Maine, up in Canada. Guess what? The marine sanctuary is going to be right where it still is, right? And so we don't have an idea of moving sanctuaries. One of the things I'm talking about. Can we have things that move on water? And so that's just one, just one issue. So we've got a governance system, whether it's national, international, even regional and coastal. It's foreign, it's shallow, and it's fixed. And what we need is something that's engaging, it's deep, and it's dynamic. And what would it look like to have things like that? So one idea that I've been playing around with is when you look as law students and lawyers do, there are different trends that pop up now. One trend is this idea of protecting special places. That's national parks, that's state parks, zoning, right? There are all kinds of ideas about how do you protect places as full systems. And we do a lot of that. Not so much of the level, all right? We've got this new trend. I mean, it's been a trend, but now it's getting, I think, a lot of traction, this idea of rights of nature. Before that, an unrelated system that I see overlap with is the ecosystem service. How are those two related? Because they're both seeing an object or a place or whatever as something that functions. Now, the ecosystem service people want it to function for us, okay, really, okay, but they still want it to function. The rights of nature people want it to function for its own self, for its own interest. That's fine. I don't care how you get there, right? But it's seeing how things are connected in a holistic way, seeing that the function is the important part, right? Not the monetary value of it, and it's certainly not replaceable in any way. And engaging the community is something that I associate with a lot of sort of modern, successful people have to care about why. Because law alone, as I said earlier, law is not going to save you. What is going to save you is people. But you need law to help people get footholds and get to where they go. Right? So we actually have law. Well, a lot of people have law. The law is the convention. That is basically it's a Ronald Reagan story. But what's really interesting about the law of the sea, as you see, is it says we've got coastal states have the right to exploit, develop, manage, all that other stuff, but conserve all resources within a 200-mile shore. That's not a mile. It varies a little bit. But here's good news, people. All right. The good news here is that these so-called exclusive economics is where most of the things that are most important to us for a functioning ocean exist. Not all right, but most coral reefs are in these EEs. So it is within somebody's power to do something about it. All right. Now the other thing to understand, we have a lot of high seas, right? Mr. Grosch's spoke about. I was at the UN Ocean Conference in France this year, and there were some very good news coming out of this conference. Some disappointments. Okay, I'll tell you what disappointment. The U.S. did not have a delegation. conference on Saudi Arabia had a delegation. Russia had a delegation. The United States had no delegation. All right. But what I found that was inspiring enough is there was some good news that came out. And people didn't care about what the US was doing. They're like, what are we doing? You know, what are other countries doing? What is the private sector? Private sector is the force in many ways. And one of the things that everyone was talking about was a treaty that just came into effect in September from the High Seas Treaty. And, you know, cocktail party before it called it the BB&J. But it's the High Seas Treaty, and it's the first treaty, right, that we have that's governing, you know, activities on the high seas. And it took, I'm going to tell you this too, it took 20 years to get this to effect from the time that it was first starting to be discussed. So anything that you're working on now matters. It takes time, but it matters. So what could we say if we were going to look at coral, for instance? If I mentioned this was a good show, all right? So how might we imagine ways to help coral? Well, let's learn a few things. It's an animal. Maybe some of you do that. Maybe a lot of you, Aristotle. He thought it was a combination of a rock and a vegetable. But now we know that coral not only is really important, but we know that it's an animal. Okay, and you can see it from space. That is reefs and so on. What you might not know is that it only occupies about 1% of the ocean floor, but is home to 1/4 of all the species in the ocean. It's food for millions of people, and it protects people from storms. And we can measure that and know exactly how it does it. So it's worth almost $4 trillion a year in services as a functioning living being. 15% of it has been lost in 12 years. And that's mainly because of that acidity problem I told you about and the marine animals. All right. These are animals, some of them the same individual has been alive for hundreds and hundreds of years. Black coral, white, here's why, right? Nutrients and sewage, overfishing, drilling, and mining, and then we've got the heat, the rising seas. We can't change that bottom, but we can change those other ones. And here, this is a picture from American Zoologist. The idea is this coral, which can be dying, which coral often dies because of and you can see the difference there. But here is the kicker: many of the world's coral reefs are resilient and bounce back. I've been in the platform a few times. There are two marine species on Montreal where I stayed and studied in the past. And that coral is amazing resilient. It has very few stressors other than the heat waves. And so it'll die, or not die, but it'll turn white, and then it'll come back, right? But the key is you have to get rid of those other things. Now, you could do that with marine protected. There's actually a big movement now to create protected areas. I sometimes call them water parks. That's because Sylvia Earle calls them water parks. Right? I got in trouble with a review on that. So I need to call it an MPA, a marine protected area, marine protection area. Okay, but we have this goal of 30 by 30. That is having 30% of the ocean covered by these protected agreements. Sylvia Earle is a huge force in this 30 by 30. And it's not the perfect solution, but it's a really, really great solution. The other one might be an idea of what I was calling nature's right. So let me just explain what I mean. I told you a little bit about the function. You have to see things as functions and not just as things that we've lost or can replace in some way. So there's some interesting movement. So we believe there's this watercraft broke a coral reef, and what they argued in court was that they just owed whatever the money was that you loss of value of the tourist attraction. And what the court said is, no, this is a living being. The court said that, and it needs to be put back together, which you can do, right? And so essentially said, look, we need this amount of damages so we can restore the coral reef to what it was. I've been very interested in the insurance policies for coral reefs. The first one was for the Mesoamerican reef, which is off the coast of Mexico. It's the second largest coral barrier reef. And the idea is that you have an insurance policy. There are two now. There's one is from Munich Re and the other is from Swiss Re. And the idea is that if you're in Mexico, the state of Quintana Roo, for instance, you can say, okay, I'm going to buy this policy. If we have a storm that has this amount of wind, we get an automatic payment of $1 million. And with that $1 million, no questions asked, we just get it now, right? And when we get that $1 million or $800,000, the last time they did work, they hire crews to repair the coral. Right, it works so well that they're doing this in Hawaii too. They have a $2 million policy, and when the wind gets over 50 knots, there's a payment. And then people go to work and they put things together. Now there are good things and there are some other things about it, but it's a very interesting point. I said I was going to show you a few places. That is actually Harvard. And this is a friend of mine that I met a few years back. I've gotten to know him well. Tituan Bernico. Tituan Bernico is one of the most certainly in the area of the South Pacific, one of the most well-known advocates of coral restoration. He is an islander. His parents were pearl divers. He was a surfer for a very long time, and he founded this coral network, Coral Gardeners. And he has not only created a system where he's planting corals with a lot of indigenous folk, a lot of islanders as well, but he's actually he's done this through social media in a way that is mind blowing. His social media project is the most popular in all of French Polynesia. He was 16 years old when he learned that coral was an animal, right? Something he'd seen his entire life, because he goes to school in French Polynesia where the syllabus is written in Paris, right? So, so there's a whole lot of learning that has to go on. But what they do is they raise and they have offshore gardens. They move these corals when they're ready to replant and to restore. As I said, they've made it cool and extremely popular, right? This is not your grandma's coral restoration project. This is something a little different from that. They let you adopt coral. Okay, we're talking about like feeling engaged, right? How do you get someone to feel engaged? You can right now on your phone. You can adopt a coral, and I'm here to tell you, I've dived Tituan, and I've seen this arrangement, and every time I've visited, there is somebody who comes from Australia or Europe or whatever, just because they want to see the place and see their coral. They ask, right? And now they've even got this. You can stand it. They've got people from Caltech, from MIT, from Stanford, all over there using AI and all kinds of things. I point this out because this is a guy who has his undergraduate in marketing, right? And it's taken a long time for him to get credibility with the science. But I'm here to tell you that he has, right? And so not only do they sell products, I think product has a line with them now. And so they're working in this marketing thing, but they're also working in trying to get the science right. And as it turns out, that's a new thing. Now, some people debate whether coral restoration is going to be the savior of everything or not. I think it's really good, at least for the engagement. And here is something I think is connected. At the UN summit that I told you about, French Polynesia announced that it was now making all of its waters, almost all of its waters, a single protected area. It's the largest marine protection area in the world. Overnight, it expanded the globe's protection of the ocean by 1 or 1.5%. I've seen these sharks. they're everywhere. Right? They don't hurt you, but they're everywhere. And talk about a toll, which is incredible thing. And all of these files receive a protection of 4.5 square kilometers. It's grounded in community and culture. The only way they can get this to work is to work with the island fisher folk, right? Who wanted to make sure that they could fish. The small scale fishers, what they hate the most are the big scale fish, right? And so what these marine areas do in French Polynesia is they reserve large spaces only for small fishers, right? So they don't have to go out further to get the same fish because they're banning mining and they're serving example to other large ocean states. Indonesia is now working in this area too, trying to build huge, water parks. Here's another little spot, and it's related to something I just mentioned, deep sea mining. Some of you may know a little bit about deep sea mining. We used to teach it. I used to teach a little bit about the law of it, but you really couldn't mine very well in deep sea technology, so nobody much cared. But now, lots of people care. Why do they care? They care because of this. Because we need a lot of minerals, things like cobalt, nickel, and so on. We need a lot of cobalt for those batteries. Okay, that we need for the green revolution. All right, where do you get cobalt and nickel and manganese and so on? Well, one place you can get them is here, right? Which is extremely problematic. Everybody who's got a phone should be feeling that it's extremely problematic. Okay, here's the other place. 4,000 meters under the sea. All right, and now some of you may know this, but some of you may not. Down there are all these little potato-sized objects called polymetallic nodules, and they contain cobalt and nickel and all kinds of things. They naturally occur like this. It takes hundreds and hundreds of years to make one of those potatoes. All right, but if you can get them out, you can unlock all of this carbon and so on, or cobalt and so on. So how do you, once you go down there, we don't even know what's down there because people have not been down there, right? We have pictures of some things that are down there, but they're hard to, make a marketing slogan around. The double octopus, right? The sea toad. So we don't even know what these animals do down there in some cases, right? And there are animals, little ones, that are living inside those nodules, right? Now look at this. Imagine this giant tank-sized Hoover going down 4,000 meters and raking up like a Hoover the seafloor. Okay, we don't even know what's down there. It's killing and taking up and pulling it out into one of the marine scientists in Florida that I talked to said, imagine, he goes, New Orleans. He goes, so if you're from New Orleans, you know hurricanes. I'm like, yeah, I know hurricanes. He's like, imagine a hurricane underwater. That's the size of some of these storms that are created by this system. And so everything in the water column is affected, right? Fish, the sediment, smothered, sea mammals, all kinds of things like that. It's a harder story because a lot of these areas are in economic zones, so it's something your own country to do it. Cook Islands are like, let's come, and they're inviting people to sort of flags to convene. Come on down and mine for us. French Polynesia, as I said, no, don't want that. But the Cook Islands wanted, and so now there's this big debate. In the high seas, we call this the common heritage of mankind, and there are rules around that we actually have a UN body that is based in downtown Jamaica that was sort of making up the rules for getting permits to go down here. But there are a significant number of companies that are in favor of some kind of a moratorium. And there are a significant number of companies who use batteries that are in favor of the moratorium. Because you can find replacements for some of them. All right. But that doesn't mean that the race is not, because our country wants to go drill, like in America, somewhere. And actually, NOAA now is advertising. We're not a part of the convention on the sea, and the reason I thought it was Ronald Reagan. The reason is Ronald Reagan wanted to stop. That's one of the reasons that we could join the convention on the sea. Well, you might know that place. It's the only bit of land really on this. And that takes us back to the Wings. Now, I'm here to tell you that we Southern residents are and the reason that they're not doing well, and there are 400 other that would say this. Lots of pollution problems, overfishing, land development, climate breakdown. Let me tell you something about Tahlequah. She's part of those Southern residents. They're a culture, that group. They only eat fish. And the fish they most likely should snap. They will swim right by a snail. They will swim right by a seagull. There are other orchids in the same state of the sea who eat those things they not and don't touch fish. Okay. There are other orchids that live on the Pacific coast of Oregon and California, and they eat sharks. Now, here's the other thing that's really interesting about this. All of these three different kinds of whales, the two different kinds of whales that live in the Sandwich, the ones that live on the Pacific coast, they are all essentially the same genome. There's a debate about whether they may be subspecies, whatever that is, but they're all the same species, right? They see each other, but they don't share food, and they don't mate outside. They actually speak in different dialects. If an orphan whale comes into a foreign community of whales, it will be adopted, and it will learn a dialect it doesn't know. They have hunting. They have hunting strategies that are only known within certain groups. This is culture, right? And so it's a very interesting thing. Some people are like, "What do we care about the Southern residents and other ones?" Right? And what you're looking, because you're not losing the genome, what you're losing is a language. What you're literally using as a culture that won't intermarry, dietary restrictions, won't intermarry, rules about all kinds of social systems. Right? And so it sort of raises all of these really interesting issues. The reason that climate change is so important in this story is because the Chinook salmon there's a shortage of Chinook salmon in the state of the sea and other sorts of salmon as well. And when there's a shortage of salmon, those Southern residents will, right? And so that baby that was born with Tahlequah was malnourished. That's why it died. And so we've got this very interesting situation. So we've got lots of people working on this problem. I spent this summer in Anacortes and other places in Washington, interviewed many of the Lummi Nation. The Lummi Nation have a connection to the orchids. They see orchids, they call orchids the people down under, and they have stories from time immemorial about orchids as actually being people wearing outfits that allow them to be underwater. And then when they come out of water, they take the outfit off. And so they have all of these super interesting stories, right? And so they are moving right now to see, they're trying to get cities around this area to declare the orca to person in order to protect the ocean. And so Langley, which is a town in Woody Island, has a proclamation against that. Fort Townsend, which some of you may know, is another town that was recognized this. And the idea isn't that we want to protect the organ the idea behind it is we want to protect the entire system. Originally, the mummies wanted to establish the sailor sea as a legal person. And what they found out is that it was more popular for people if you could say it was right. And so this is this kind of engagement that's going on. You go online and find your favorite whale and where it's been. These are the most studied whales in the world. I can tell you Tallaquah's mother, grandmother, we even know her grandfather. Think about that for a minute. It's kind of difficult to tell, but they know these things. And the one who's helping me so much with this is Ellie of the Lummi Nation, who is a multi-generational salmon. Took a stake down on the boats and so on. So many people. But whale watchers are out there. They're trying, to build solidarity around this too. And as you may know, these issues go all the way up, right? So the removal of the Elgwa Dam is actually meant, among other things, to help the resident orcas, because hoping the salmon friends return. This just shows you, I mean, these are the three whales. One's called the resident, one's called the bigs, one's called the offshore. And the morphology is just slightly, but they really are all the same whale, right? And in fact, whales, orcas, live in every ocean. They're all over the world. They've colonized the entire planet. They are the apex predator. Nothing is an orca whale. Orca whales eat almost everything. That's not where they are, including bluefins, the largest animal. They're ferocious. They're like us. They're like us. In good ways and bad. They're very conservative, right? They won't change their mindsets. They eat what they eat. They marry. They talk how they talk, and they never really change. And that's actually been a source of much success for them. But now it is a source of vulnerability. And it's our vulnerability too, if we can't learn to think and see the world in a different way. I was out on the San Juans a few times this summer whale watching. I never saw a southern resident. Now all you see is the deep springs, and they're everywhere, and they're beautiful. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, okay, so where are the southern residents gone? Well, actually, you see them near Seattle. Not everyone quite understands, and now they're hanging out right over the Strait of San Juan, but they're really not coming into these waters where they normally are, which is very upsetting. The Lummi Nation. The Lummi Nation was based in the San Juan Island. Never been to the San Juan Islands, the condos, and all of that. All of that is Lummi land. That's where the Lummi live. That's where we fish. The whole thing. Anyway, this is Frio, and this is a cat that doesn't have a name because we don't know if it's a boy or a girl, and it takes a while to figure that out. So it just sort of goes to show. Now, I wanted to conclude this with a story about Tahlequah. So some of it's a good news story. Newspapers around the world following Tahlequah, and Tahlequah had a baby named Phoenix, who's been seen very recently, a boy now, an adult male or a teenage male, like said, doing teenage male things, kind of going out with his friends. I mean, you watch this, his other male friends, they go around and they watch mating rituals so they can learn how that works, and then they go back and they tell other males. So this is what happens, right? But this also happened. This was just last winter, when Tahlequah was again doing a dance of grief. Not one nearly as long and dramatic, but one that showed that this calf who died, again with malnourishment, is a problem for the orcas. And so when I talked to the Lummi folks, they say, look, the big whales are thriving. Why are they thriving? They eat seals and they eat sea lions. And you know why we have a lot of seals and sea lions? Because the marine mammal protection. So we got lots of seals and sea lions now. Not a lot of Chinook and not a lot of the residents. The very last thing that I just want to say is that, you know, I've been learning incredible amounts like this, and I want to really thank Loyola and Harvard Radcliffe to help me. And this is the research in the last few years that has been sort of calming through all of this and helping me make sense of it all, to write a book for a popular audience, try to explain. I know you've read wonderful books about fish and octopuses, all kinds of things, right? And most of them are from the science point of view, which I think is really important. But if Sylvia Earle is right, and science is not going to solve this problem, we need people like you to understand the human collective action issue. And that's what I am trying to get across. Talks like this, and in the stories I tell. So what I want you to do is think about anything that's connected to the ocean that you care about, and ask yourself how you might have some role in it, whether it's the kind of fish that you choose, whether it's the kind of activities that you take on, whether it's discussions you have with other people, whether it's the plastic bottle that you buy or don't buy at the store. All of those things matter a lot, and you have to be able to see this connection. So take a deep breath and don't be afraid to take it.
Thank you. That was very informative and inspiring, and a master class in how to use PowerPoint slides. Let us all take that wonderful example. So we have a few minutes for questions or comments or observations from anyone. We can pass this mic around so folks can be heard. Professor Daniel.
Well, I'll just start so everybody realizes it's not so scary to ask a question.
You might be scared to answer your question.
So Rob, since it just went into effect, I'm interested in what you think of the High Seas Treaty and its prospects for actually making things better.
Yeah, because as you know, the implementation of these sorts of one of the things I really like about the high school treaty, a line I had in my spatial planning, right? What's that? And what it actually means, there's entity that are the option of making these marine protected that are in non-jurisdictional waters, which would have to bring nations together to sort of agree on what the practice should be in a place that we want to say there is no law. What I like about that is it starts to encourage countries to align interests in terms of sustainability and protection, and to start using that language. And one of the things that I like about that is it's a way to for countries to sort of demonstrate that they care about certain things and that the rest of the world cares about certain things. And it only works, I think, because we have an economic system that we talked about in classes today that is starting to see the value of things. So Indonesia, for instance, is selling the first outcome-based bonds. What that essentially means is that they're selling bonds, you can invest in them. If they actually are able to use that money to improve coral or parts of the ocean in a better way, you get a bigger return if they fail. All right, which means that now you're interested in Indonesia's people, and Indonesia is interested in its legal. So it's a way of aligning values, and I'm hoping as you know, there's also this environmental assessment part, and it's a very powerful tool in the right hands. It can't be abused but I'm hopeful, and the people that I met and talked with the conference with them.
I can talk loudly. I'm curious about this insurance concept that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It sounds good, but why does it not have the same issues as the like wildfire? What, like, why would anyone insure right now, given the state of the ocean?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's a financial instrument. It's essentially like a bet, right? You know, it's like one side is betting that there's going to be a superstorm, and the other side is betting that there isn't. And if you win the bet, then money changes, or money can change hands if you say, you pay me that there's a storm of this magnitude. But there are a lot of things that have to go right in something like that. So there has to be a match between the payment and the risk, right? And so, and that can be a problem. In other words, let's say there are 2 or 3 storms in the season, and I've insured, essentially the way the insurance policy works is you get for 1 storm, right? And then there's a cap, just like there is on insurance. And so it is a bit of a contest. You know, Mexico is paying a certain amount of the premium betting that there will be a storm, and then the insurers are betting that there won't be a storm. So yeah, I think that as the climate continues to wreak havoc with storms and it becomes less predictable, the premiums might go up too high, or insurers might leave the market. Both of those things can happen on land. And so I think you're right, you're exactly right about it. And you know, we'll see if there are ways to hedge that.
Well, I was just gonna add, you mentioned that he's like Southern rather than more of a big, and you kind of pointed to other than MSK, but ESA.
Sure.
Are there other reasons why in your research why not or complete? Why are the more big part of the line
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Yeah. So the southern residents are protected by the Endangered Species Act. So we say, well, why aren't they doing better, right? Oh, I see the trend. Yeah. Well, see, the problem is that the Endangered Species Act is not read in a way to ensure the changes that have to happen for the well. And one of those things is the dams, right? The dams are one of the major reasons that the Chinook are failing, and so unless you can change some of those big moving parts, it's hard to get the fish populations to people they're supposed to be. One of the things I found fascinating about this, particularly talking to members of the One Nation, who are since time immemorial in Chinook fisher folk, they're very insistent on being able to fish for Chinook salmon, right? Even as they're very insistent that the whales be protected. And they have hatcheries they run to for different types of salmon, and that's its own problem. But I think you're right. I mean, you don't have a structure to protect the salmon the way because part of the way the ecosystem is. So the habitat is from the interior of Idaho. That's how it works.
Time for one more.
Well, it seemed to me there were 2 different messages that I was getting talked about. You started off with us talking taking a breath.
Yeah.
Because our oxygen is coming
the ocean. We talked about the fishermen live, and not just fishermen, but so many people live on the basis of fish. Then we talk about the value to us of coral system, maintaining the quality of the fish, the number of fish, the texture of the seashore. That's all about protecting the ocean, because if you don't protect the ocean, it will hurt us.
Yes.
Then we talked about the orcas, right? And then we talked about protecting the orcas because we love the orcas, right? Not to protect the ocean, right? Not because it's going to actually help us, but just because we love the orcas. And it seemed to me there was two different stories, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And I mean, I love the orcas, unless I'm a Pharaoh Octopus, Portugal. But that's it. It's its own group, and they have a culture of destroying sailing boats. Right? So the idea of having these two different messages, I think they're different messages. Maybe they should be identified.
So I understand that, yeah, and I actually think they are two different messages, but I'm gonna try to pull them together, all right? I'm a practical guy, you know that, I'm a practical. And I look at ways of trying to solve problems. One of the ways to solve problems, for me, is to try to establish sort of values of knowledge sharing. Now, I actually don't care whether you talk about this or not. I think what I hope is that you see that workers have some interest in the life, which is more like respect, more common. So I ask that we respect the systems that they've developed, and in the same way, I would argue that I would ask them to respect the systems that oceans themselves, through currents and upswells and all those. That we respect those interactions and that machinery that we have evolved to benefit from. And I guess I'm not trying to convince you of the moral argument that the Salish Sea or the Orca or the upswell has a right to exist, although I think it might. What I want you to understand is that something you care about is the thing. And if that's something you care about is the life of the Orca or the culture of the Orca language, then that's great. If the thing that you are interested in is being able to have oxygen or food, I want you to enter in that way. And so I think what I'm doing really is being what I hope is a good lawyer, giving more than one rationale for the same thing that I want, because I don't know who the judge is, right? Who the judge is going to be. and so I'm trying to tell, and it's the same context, the same way, I'm just trying to get you. I mean, in the book, believe me, going to the publishers, whatever, you know, they like the whale. They like the whale, you know, and I said, well, if it takes talking about the whale to get people convention on law of the sea, I'll try. So I take the point, and I guess I can take both of these, right? And I don't mind if the speech or the presentation.
Well, thanks for the great questions, and thank you again, Rob, for spending this time with us and inspiring us. Just quickly, I also want to thank Delia Weidman, who's our program coordinator, who does all the logistics for our events beautifully, as well as Madison Hogan back there as part of our events team. Just wanted to give a shout out to all the work you both did to make this event. So yes,